going to talk about arthropods, what makes insects different from arachnids, and some other bugs we have here today. So first I wanted to show you some really interesting bugs that we have today. Right here in this terrarium right here, we have our African giant emperor scorpions. Now they are really neat little creatures, and most people are kind of scared of scorpions because they are a venomous species. However, they rate them on a level of 1 to 5. 1 being the least toxic, and communal, which these guys are. They're communal, they live in family groups. Matter of fact, there are 2 males and 4 females in this group. Now these guys are 7 years old, and when they hit the age of 5 was the first year that they had their own offspring. So these guys do have one thing in common with all insects. They do have an exoskeleton. Now that exoskeleton doesn't grow with them. What happens is they live inside this exoskeleton, and as they grow, they eventually outgrow it. So it'll actually tear open this top part of the carapace right here, and it tears open, and then if you look up closely, they actually have little holes where all their legs were, and it's much like if you had a glove on. You pulled that glove off, you could see where your fingers were. That's exactly what you're looking at. Now that exoskeleton is very brittle, so we have them in these containers right here, much like an eggshell. If you touch it, they can actually break off the leg because these are dried now. So scorpions, they have that stinger right there. A lot of people say, well, can you take the stinger off? No, you can't actually, because it's connected to an artery that goes all the way to their heart, and that's actually how they inject the venom. So they consider these a poisonous species because they inject their venom. Whereas something like a dart frog, which would be a frog that actually emits poison through their skin, they would consider that poisonous, not venomous. So these guys at full size, it looks like they're about 4 inches long. Now just like arachnids, they actually have 8 eyes. 2 are positioned right on the top of their head, little specks, and then they have 3 on either side of their mouth. Now although they have 8 eyes, they have terrible eyesight, so they rely mostly on these hairs on their claws to help them catch their prey. These guys are an ambush predator, so what they do is, typically they hide under maybe like a piece of bark or a rock like that, and their whole body can go flat. That tail will go sideways, and on their claws right here, they have all these little hairs. So if, say, a cricket or a roach came up and was crawling and hit those hairs and they were hungry, they'd reach over, grab it, and start eating it. Now their mouth parts are called mandibles, so they're basically like a little pincher. They don't have mouth parts like us, and they'll pull apart that insect and kind of shove it in that little cavity in the front until the insect is completely gone. Now all arachnids have 2 hooks on each one of their legs. So if you get up real close to their feet, you can see there's 2 little hooks connected, and that keeps them so that they have a way to hang on. And when you put them on something textured like this, they can actually hang on upside down. These guys are kind of heavy-bodied, so they slide off a little bit. But there are actually over 2,000 species of scorpions. This happens to be a tropical one, so they like this substrate in here that helps keep the humidity up. And then you can go into desert regions where they'll have nice arid type scorpions, and they actually have a different color. They'll be lighter in color to help reflect the heat and blend in more with the sand. So scorpions have this really cool layer called a hyaline layer, and it actually reacts to ultraviolet, black light, and even moonlight, and gives them this visual fluorescent. So normally they kind of have a blue or black color to them, sometimes brown, but when you put that light over, it reacts, that special protein reacts to that layer of light, and that's what enables them to actually glow. And you can see their mouth parts right there in the front, how they're like 2 little pinchers. That's how they pull that food into the front of their mouth there. So another arachnid we have is everyone's favorite, right? Everybody likes tarantulas and spiders. So we have Miss Fluffy right here. Now Miss Fluffy is a giant Chaco golden meat tarantula. These guys are endemic to Mexico. And Miss Fluffy, if she really likes you and trusts you, she'll start to lay web on you. So she's got these little spinnerets back here, right at the back part of her body. And right there, there's several little areas that actually pull out thread. And she'll use the little things right there on the back to actually plant the web on stuff. Now if you look at how big-bodied she is, you can tell she's a terrestrial tarantula, which means she lives on the ground. The tarantulas that you're going to find that are arboreal, that live up in the trees, tend to be much slender, just because of the areas that they hang out in. Now as you notice, she's walking around. A lot of people go up and they get real close and they say, wow, she's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 legs? Well, it's kind of a trick because these 2 in the front aren't really legs at all. What they are is they are called pedipalps. They're like your arms. So they're going to get her prey items from wherever they're at on up to those fangs where she's going to inject her venom. Now the way their venom works is much like your stomach acid. So it's gonna basically break down all the matter in whatever bug she happens to eat. If it's a cricket and she injects her venom, it's gonna liquefy everything inside. And with those hollow fangs, then she's gonna slurp up the nutrients inside. So it kind of starts the digestive process. Now these guys, because they're an arachnid, also have those little hooks on each one of her legs. And these guys have a cluster of 8 eyes right on the top of their head right there. Now, I told you she does lay web. Let's see if we can get her to lay some. Sometimes she'll do it for us. She just molted, which means she just shed her skin. There we go. So you can see right there, you can see that's not just one little thread. Just like a rope, the more little pieces there are, the easier it is for them to use it, and it's very sticky. So what she uses her web for, unlike a spider who uses their web to catch prey, she uses all these tiny hairs on her body to help her catch prey. Just like the scorpion, if they're in a cave or if they're in a little burrow and a bug walks by and it brushes up against those hairs, if they're really hungry, they'll try and go for it real quickly. Let's see if we can get her to eat a bug. I'm gonna put her right in here. We're gonna see, I brought some super worms and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. And I got some tweezers, so let's see if she'll eat one of these little guys right here for you. She might not be hungry. We might have to try her favorite snack, which is a cricket. So she's not hungry right now, but she's not full size either. These guys actually live, if they're males, they don't live as long as females. So males typically live between 2, maybe 4 years. That's their average lifespan. But for a female tarantula, these guys can live anywhere between 15 on up to 20 years. So they do have a much longer lifespan than the males. So males are around long enough to spread their genetic code, and that's about it. So when she does get pregnant, what will happen is if she does find another male to mate with, they have a really interesting mating dance. The males will actually drum, they kind of tap their legs like this in order to woo the female. Now if he's a good drummer or a good musician, he's gonna definitely get the girl. And so then they'll court, and what will happen is after they mate, she will actually lay an egg sac contained with hundreds of tiny little eggs that will eventually grow and become little tarantulas. So what she'll do is she'll lay out a web on the substrate in there. She'll deposit all her eggs on there, and then she'll go ahead and wrap it up into a ball. And believe it or not, just like chicken eggs have to be rotated in other types of birds, she will rotate that egg sac inside her burrow. So she'll actually push it and move it around, and that's the only way that they're going to develop properly inside that little egg sac. When the time comes, it'll tear open, and those little spiderlings is what they call them, or slings, will actually crawl out and start a life of their own. So now we've seen our arachnids. Now we're going to talk about the difference between arachnids and other insects. So insects are going to have 3 parts to their body. They're going to have the head, the thorax, and then the abdomen. Whereas the tarantulas kind of have the head feature and then just the abdomen on there. So I brought these really cool worms right here. These are called superworms, okay? Now they're not really a worm at all. These guys are a larva state of a beetle. So what happens is you'll have these beetles here. And most people don't know this, but beetles, like these guys, or stink bugs some people call them, when you get them upset, like say you jostle them around a lot, they let off a funky odor. And so most animals don't typically eat the beetles at all, and that's so they can preserve their life. What'll happen though is the beetles will mate together. They'll lay eggs. Once they lay those eggs, they'll hatch out in a very tiny, about 1/8 of an inch worm, and then they'll eventually, over several months, grow to be this size right here. So these are just the larval state of the beetle. Now they have a whole process, a life cycle, if you will, when we're talking about these beetles. So they lay them, they become the eggs, and then they have those eggs hatch out into worms. Then the only way that these guys will actually change into a beetle is if they are separated from their group. This whole group will never change on their own, but if they're in a cage, say they were in a bowl and they crawled out and went under the bowl, you'll find a little worm in there that will kind of be frozen in time, if you will. Then what will happen is they will turn into a pupa, that's what this is. So it still moves, it's alive in there, but it's kind of also frozen in time. Before they get ready to hatch out into a beetle, the pupa is going to get a little bit darker color. That means it's getting close. So it's going to get a darker color right there. Then, when it hatches out, they're actually going to be, here's one right here, they're pretty soft. When they first hatch, they're almost white in color before their shell dries. So we've got a white one right there, and this one's a little bit drier, so it's trying to turn red, but eventually, in a matter of a day or two, they'll be the color of those black beetles. So we've got another tool bug to show you guys. And this particular animal has a couple really important things that it does, okay? These guys are called millipedes. These are African giant millipedes right here. They get about 8 inches in length. Now here's a female and here's a male. If you can see right there, the 7th segment down, you're gonna see some foam stuff right there. That's the male producing out of his glands what they would before they mate. And these guys will mate leg to leg. So these guys have several legs. Matter of fact, their legs move in a really rhythmic way. At full size, an adult millipede will actually have about 400 sets of legs right here. Now, if you notice, they're constantly using those antennae to kind of tap them along the surface that they're crawling on. Even though they do have 2 small eye parts, they don't see very well at all, and they rely mostly on those antennae to get a sense of what's around them right there. These guys are excellent climbers, and they are also excellent burrowers. So these guys, as they burrow through the soil, they actually help aerate the roots for plants, and that's really important for the plants as well. And these guys eat stuff that most no other animal wants to eat. So they like decaying plant matter. That's one of their favorites. They also do enjoy fresh produce, but in the wild, they're not going to come across a whole bunch of fresh produce. They eat decaying leaf matter, fungus. They'll eat different types of fungus that grow. And these guys will also consume other animals' waste. So they do have an important job in our environment as far as breaking down and helping the compost process happen. So these guys at full size are about 8 inches in length, and they're super fast. Now what's really unique about these guys, because they live in dark areas, is that if you had 3 or 4 different species of a millipede under a rock where it's dark, how do you think they don't know not to breed with one another? Well, it has to do with their reproductive organs. The males, their reproductive organs are actually all shaped differently. So when a female comes up and rubs her legs on them, if it's not the right size, then, or if it's not the right shape, that's how they know it's not the same species, and they'll refrain from breeding with them. These guys, the millipedes, are in the family of Diplopida, and that makes them a little different than some of our other insects because they don't actually molt or shed their skin at all, and they don't have any type of a life cycle like these other guys. The parents will actually burrow down about 1 foot into the ground, and a female will kind of carve out a little pocket to lay her eggs, and what she'll do is she'll deposit her eggs in there. Once that happens, it's going to take usually about 3 to 4 months for them to hatch out. And the babies are going to continue to live pretty much in the soil until they're about 2 or 3 years old because their exterior shell isn't very hard yet. And I had some babies in here. They might have burrowed down. Oh, here they are. These guys, to give you an idea, when they first hatched out, they were 3/4 of an inch long, and now they're maybe 2.5 inches. They're a year old, so it takes them quite a while to actually grow to be the size of these other guys in here. Some of these larger ones I have, they're about 5 to 6 years old, and they should live on average between 9 to 12 years. So I also brought another insect, kind of a taboo insect. People think when they hear this insect or see this insect that it's a dirty insect, but really they're cleaning up typically after the mess that most humans make. So we have these little guys. These guys are our infamous cockroaches, okay? Now in Florida here, they are very specific on what feeder insects you are allowed to have and not have because we live in a temperate climate. So things can survive here year round. So they don't allow like invasive species like the hissing roaches here in Florida. There's 6 different species you can keep, 6 of which, of those 6, 3 fly. So I'm not into the flying insects, they kind of freak me out. But these guys are going to be what they call a live-bearing roach, okay? Now, they don't give birth to live young right away, kind of like you're thinking. What'll happen is they are sexually dimorphic. If you look at this one on this side, the belly, the abdomen is a lot bigger, and that is the female. She'll actually incubate her own eggs. So the male and the female will mate back to back, kind of like the love bugs do here in Florida. And then the female, once those eggs are fertilized, she'll actually pass them into the other cavity of her body where they'll incubate. It takes about 4 months. Those guys will come out, and they're actually live little roaches at that time. Now these guys only reproduce if they're actually in a colony, so they typically do well when you have about 100 of them, mixed sexes, and so they mate with other different types of bugs. Now these guys are herbivores, so they'll pretty much eat any type of vegetation. They really enjoy any type of leafy green stuff that you can give them, and then you can give them other types of vegetation that you have as well. Well, this has been a really interesting episode because it has to do with all these little creepy crawly things. I do have a friend of mine back here. This is Miss Fire. She is one of our bearded dragon animal ambassadors, and she really enjoys these little super worms right here. They're kind of crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside. Now if you noticed her head shaking, that's a very interesting thing that happens. I got this dragon when she was about 4 years old, and the shaking was a lot more violent than it is now. What happened is the people that had her before me didn't realize they needed to provide them with certain things. When animals are in captivity, they don't get all the necessary things that they would find out in the wild. One of the things that's very important for these guys is D3, which normally comes from the sun. But in captivity, you have special lighting for these guys. So they require an additional D3, which comes in the form of a powdered supplement, usually with calcium. And when we do that, and they get that D3, those lights help them process it. So they work hand in hand together. So without the proper lighting, they get these little tremors like this. Now they won't ever go away all the way, but they aren't getting any worse anymore. And she should live a pretty healthy and happy life. She should live around 9 to 13 years. Right now she's 7, so she's still kind of mid-range right now. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. I hope you had a great time learning about the different types of arachnids and creepy crawlies we have here on the farm. I want you to join us next time. Subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends, and hopefully you'll get to check out our next episode next week. Thank you.